It's that time of year again. It's getting to in the middle of the fourth quarter, and it's always time when we start thinking about what's next year going to look like. And so it's annual planning time. And whether you do annual planning in November, December, early January, it's time to start thinking about it. And because I've been doing this for 20 years with companies and spent a lot of time helping small to large size businesses think through their annual planning process and actually facilitated a lot of those. I think there's some things today that if you're beginning to think about doing your annual planning, how you should process that. And what I'm going to do is just kind of break down some stuff that works. So if you already do it, you might get something that is helpful to you, an extra way to think about something. If you don't do it, hopefully this gives you a sense of how you might actually process this whole annual planning thing that I think is really important for your business. So let's start. And I guess the first place that I want to start is what happens if you don't do annual planning. And I feel like sometimes this is kind of how I see it, is you kind of, as an owner or executive, you have these dreams about where you want to go, and they're not clearly defined. They're just out there. You may have a dream of, how much money you want to make or how big you want to be or whatever, that kind of thing. But as the year unfolds, so through the entire year, Q1, Q2, Q3, what happens is you get pulled in by what I think are shiny objects. And so as you process through the year, this shiny object hits you, and then another one does, and then another one does, and then another one does. And then you get here, and then while you may have thought there was like an end result, it wasn't clearly defined. It was this big, broad net that you were kind of trying to reach based on your dreams back here. And whether you reached it or achieved it or ended up somewhere else, it's kind of an ad hoc way to do it. Well, a lot of companies do that, and good for them, but I don't think it's the way you should be thinking about it. How I like to think about it is you do annual planning, and you clearly define, as you process through a series of quarters, the specific place you're trying to reach. And then how I find this to occur is you kind of go in this process and you meander through this, sometimes above plan, sometimes you're not achieving plan, and you may not actually hit the bullseye of where you're planning. You might be above it, you might be slightly below it, but at least you've had a structure in terms of the direction you're heading. And so that's why I think annual planning is so good, because you hit the end of the year and you begin to think about, okay, where are we going? How are we going to get there? What's the process? What's our objective? What's our goal? And in doing so, I feel like what you have is a cleaner path to get to that end goal, as opposed to just a haphazard ad hoc one that was shown before. And so in order to do that, in order to think about your annual planning process, I think first it's to review what's optimal. What's an optimal planning process? And I think there's 5 key things to an optimal process. The first one is a really solid commitment to what it is you're doing, a commitment to create for yourself and your business a clear outlined objective of where you're going, what that means, what that looks like, how it unfolds. But it forces, like, to me, it just requires, or it doesn't force you to, but it requires you to be committed to this process. Because if you're not going to sit down and do this, and you're not committed to it, it's not going to work anyways. You're going to fall back into that ad hoc, we're just aiming somewhere. And so there's a commitment that's needed. I think secondly, you need your key management team involved. If it's just you as an owner, or operator, I think it's weak. If you're only 1 or 2 people, that's different. But if you have a team, and even if you're 5, 6, 7, 10, and you have a management layer or a supervision layer, I think that group can be really helpful to the process. But bring your key management team in. I think an optimal process for a annual planning is some degree of work within that planning process that supports your management team, your supervision team, even if it's small, some kind of health, the health of that team, the health of working together. That's not just related to the planning process, but the actual work of doing it together. The next is you have to have a way to capture it in terms of an optimal process for planning. You have to have a way to capture all of the stuff that you deal with in this annual planning process, because without that, what you miss is some of the real gold that comes out of these sessions that may be actual not related to this year, but may be related to a future year. But the ability to capture it, to keep it in notes, whether that be on sticky notes or big white paper, or somebody documenting it in computer as a scribe, something that helps you to really keep all of the notes of this so that it can be either more deeply transcribed after the fact, more deeply held as archival beneficial documents to your company, but you got to have that. And then finally, I think, and I fully believe this, it needs to be 2 days and it needs to be offsite. And I have deliberate reasons for that. I've done this so many times over the years that I find that first, offsite. If you're not offsite, you're pulled back into your reality. So whether you have an office or whether you work virtually, but you work out of your office, it's really important to bring your team to a specific place that is independent of either the business or your regular working conditions, and it's in that place you do it. So let's call it offsite where it's normal for you to be, and that means off phones, off whatever. Yes, at breaks you can deal with stuff, but like, commit to it, because that's back to number one. If you're not committed to this process, it's really not helpful. And then I think 2 days really matters because it really is a process. It makes so much sense to spend 2 days out of every year planning for the future year, even though you may be regularly adopting and enhancing the plan through the year. 2 days to step aside, 2 days of 365 to actually clearly define where you're going. So that to me is the optimal process I've learned over the years. All right, let's look at some of the included elements of this planning process, this 2-day planning process. The first is to review results from last quarter, last year, review and refresh the company strategy, do a SWOT analysis on your current reality, define your annual plan going forward, deal with issues that have come up through the process, and then finally review your quarter one commitments. And I'm going to go back through those and spend a bit more time, but I want to give you the lay of the land. This is where we're going. First, review results from the last quarter. So I think here it's really the good, the bad, and the ugly. Like, really put it all out on the table. One of the best things to do, and why 2 days is important, is you need to spend a couple of hours just looking at where we've come from. What were the accomplishments? What were the failures? What were the lessons we got from that? What were the things left unfinished? Where did we have things we wanted to accomplish that we didn't? Where were we stuck? What were the things that caused us to be stuck? What are the unresolved things that need to be addressed going forward? I think we have to look at, in terms of your management team, what were some of the professional accomplishments? What were the things that happened in a good way? What were some of the things that weren't so successful? And in doing so, what you're doing is you're laying the foundation, because nothing goes to waste when you have a review process of the previous year. So as you're considering where you're going, know where you came from. And knowing where you come from is a really solid place to begin the planning process. So that's number one. Then number two is we want to review and refresh our company strategy, our overall company strategy. And I want to break that down a little bit more, because I think this is a really important thing. A lot of times in annual planning, if all we do is go, where are we going next year, but we don't take time to really solidify who we are as a company, what we're all about, then I think we get lost, because if we know where we've come from, but we realize that in that we've got to adapt, adjust, reconfigure, refresh, re-edit, realign some things within our bigger company strategy. That's what we want to do. So what are some of those things? First, there's your big, hairy, audacious goal. I see this as your 7 to 10 year, where you're ultimately headed. And a lot of times this is your big future result. I want to be at a certain size. I want to be at a certain scope. And it's often out 10 years in the future. This is Jim Collins' famous thing, big, hairy, audacious goal. Where are you going? What's the big thing you're headed for? And I think you got to review that. You got to stop and say, okay, the whole goal of why we exist as a business is to get to this end result. And that's important to review and refresh. Second, I think you have to look at your strategic pillars. And strategic pillars are an important thing. To me, simply put, I believe your strategic pillars are those 3 to 4 strategic battlefields, those strategic areas that your business needs to win in no matter what else happens. And so I think it's important to refresh your strategic pillars. Are they the right ones? Are you doing the right things? Do you have the right base and elements in your overall strategic plan to ensure you're going in the right direction? Then you want to look at culture. How is our culture? What about our values? Have our values evolved or changed? Are we clear on the kind of people we want around? Are we clear on how we want our lives to look? Are we clear on how we want this business to be? Then we kind of related to that, and I think they're connected, is review how we want team health to look like, how we want our people being one of the most critical factors in your business. Unless you're a solo operator, team health is everything going forward, and more so in the current climate we live in. Then what about brand positioning, who we are in the world? What are our promises? What's the way we talk about ourselves in the world? What are our unique selling propositions? Why should people choose us versus any other? I think it's really important to spend a little bit of time reviewing and refreshing your brand positioning. Then I think if we understand our big, hairy, audacious goal and we're clear on some of this stuff, then as an annual planning process, it's really important to refresh our 3-year milestones. There's something really powerful about a 3-year plan. A 3-year plan is just far enough out to give you some objective goals to reach for, but it's at the same time, and it's on the way to your big, hairy, audacious goal, but it's not quite there yet. But 3 years is a really good time frame. It's like we can see 3 years into the future, but we can't really see 10. We can set these big, hairy, audacious goals in 10, but our 3-year milestones tied to our BHAG, but also related to all this other stuff matters. So what are some of the financial goals you have in the next 3 years? What about what that looks like, how your business has to grow in the next 3 years to get to your big, hairy, audacious goal? And I think it's really important to review those. And then finally, what's the structure of the business? Do we have to review the structure of the business, the way we structure our org chart, the way we structure our accountability? Let's say you have a sales and marketing division. Do we need to pull those apart and make sales and business development a section to itself and have marketing as a separate section? Operationally, do we have to change the structure of our operational orientation to more effectively serve our clients? Admin, finance, leadership, all of that kind of stuff is worth reviewing in this company strategy review session. And so I think it's really important in your annual planning to go back. You don't need to spend hours at this, and a lot of times not a lot has to change. If you're clear and have done work on this before, it might be incremental changes, subtle changes, but I think it's really important every annual planning session you revisit these things. So we review the results from the last year and last quarter. What did we accomplish? What were the results, good, bad, and the ugly? We review and refresh our company strategy, the elements we just talked about. And then I think it's really important to do a SWOT analysis on our current reality. And a SWOT analysis on our current reality is what are our strengths, what our current weaknesses, what are the opportunities present in the marketplace, and what are the problems or the issues that are presenting themselves, the traps that we could get ourselves into in this upcoming year. And I think before you go into your annual planning, it's really important to kind of set that out. So a lot of people in this in 2022 are realizing we have major issues with labor, especially with entry type labor, with the people that are who have really in the last year done a lot of changes in how they want to be employed. And so if you're not considering that as a part of a threat to your business, in the SWOT analysis, you can't really effectively plan where you're going. So I think it's important to do it on your business, on your competitors, on the economy at large, on the trends you're seeing both in your industry, in your service, and in the greater economy that you're dealing with. Debt, all those kind of things, how to deal with debt, cost of debt, all the kind of stuff that factors into what your plans are really important in your annual planning procedure. And I think you have to deal with them in this process, and failure to deal with them in the process means you haven't really explored all the stuff you have to do for your annual planning. Then you want to define the annual plan. And this is really the meat and heart of your annual planning session, is what is our annual plan? So let's look at some things. I think the first thing is you need to address your key financial goals for this upcoming year. But I think it's really important not just to look at what we want in terms of revenue, what we want in, but you also need to address what we want in terms of profit. So there's revenue, there's profit, and those two are critical. But then tied to this, which is really important, is what are the implications of that? In terms of key financials. And a lot of times we just set a number out there, but we really don't manage the implications of that. So that's the first thing I want you to think about. The next thing is, and I think this one's, I've started doing this recently in meetings, and this has been really helpful, is doing a pre-mortem. And a pre-mortem is, if we died this year, why did we die? And it sounds gruesome, but it's really illuminating. So if our business doesn't make it this year, what happened? What did we do wrong? And I think as you prepare, as you kind of understand the key financials that you're aiming for, but it's also really helpful to look at like what could go wrong here. And this comes out of your SWOT analysis. It comes out of where you're positioned in the world. It also comes out what you're trying to accomplish financially in this year. But the pre-mortem is really a little bit of jumping into what could go wrong, and that needs to be a part of the conversation. Next, then I think you go into key initiatives, and with key initiatives, it's really initially it's a brain dump of all the things we could do in this coming year to support getting the results we need, moving forward in the business we want, understanding what we could be doing wrong or what could kill us this year. But it's like we have a whole bunch of key initiatives, and then the strategic process in your annual planning is culling through those initiatives to reduce those to the minimum viable dose required to move the company forward in this year to achieve the key financials, to actually accomplish what needs to be accomplished in this year. Then I think it's really important to look at our KPIs and scorecard. How are we going to measure this progress of these key initiatives? Once we decide what the real ones are, and getting these key initiatives in place, some people call them rocks, some people call them initiatives, some people call them objectives. However you want to define it, you got to attach to those a couple of things. One is, what's the scorecard? What's the KPI, key performance indicator, that we're actually accomplishing that thing? And then tied to that is, who's accountable for it? Like, who actually owns these initiatives? And so that's a part of this process. And this takes time and this takes digging, which is why you need 2 days, because this is not an easy process. Related though, I think we have to also address how's the structure of our business, not just who's accountable for the key initiatives and the KPI scorecard, but who's accountable for how the business is going to operate. And we have to think through our org chart, the way we structure our business, who has responsibility for specific areas, what are the gaps in our business related to people and the people we're going to need going forward. And then finally, as you're developing the annual plan, you have to have a mechanism. And that's why I said in the very first slide, we really have to have a way to document things. And so I think you have to have a parking lot as you're dealing with this annual plan about what are the issues that are coming out of this conversation? What are the issues that keep arising? Because inevitably in planning, what happens is a plan or an initiative is put forth and immediately we have a reaction to it, a negative reaction. And a lot of times that negative reaction actually becomes an issue that can be addressed to actually move our business forward. So it's documenting the issues that keep coming up. And as we're building out this annual plan, that's the thing we're working on, which is where are we going? What's important in that? What could kill us? What are the key initiatives? How do we get to the minimum viable dose of key initiatives that are going to really drive us forward this year? We actually build those out. And then I think what you do in one more level is you take all of that and then you go, what's Q1 look like? And so we take the year initiatives and ultimately we break it down so we know where we're going in Q1. So who has responsibility for Q1? Who's got what's happening? And so the year becomes really addressed in terms of a yearly planning. The annual plan becomes a quarterly plan that is all of these pieces shoved into that first quarter. All right, so we review results from last year. We look at and refresh our company strategy. We do a SWOT analysis on our current reality. We define the annual plan. And then we take all the issues that have shown up in the last 2 days, and generally you're in the second afternoon by this point, and we actually look through all the issues that have shown up, all the challenges, all the threats that have shown up. And because we've got those documented, we actually go through a process of defining those, really digging into those, and then having a next step on where do we go with this. And then finally, we go back as we end the 2-day annual planning session. We go back and we review our yearly and most importantly, our Q1 commitments. The team in the room, the leaders, the management team in the room reviews those commitments. And that's how I think a really effective process, a 2-day process unfolds. All right. In conclusion, though, I want to just document some of the lessons I've learned from doing this for 20 years, because I've seen a lot of this happen. I've done it so many times, and this is what I've learned. First, many of you don't want to commit to 2 days, but inevitably, people who take 1 day or 2 half days find that at the end of those 2 half days, they barely got into it enough. And it always feels, and I have stated this many times to my clients who want to do half days or 1 day, it's not enough. You got to do more. You have to be able to fully embrace this process, because to run and grow a business takes a lot of strategic planning. It takes a lot of planning. And if you can't give yourselves 2 days a year, but it takes longer than you want to spend. And I really encourage you to not gyp yourself of this time. It's so important. Secondly, and this one is even more critical, especially as smaller company. Larger companies tend to be able to separate this. And by larger companies, I mean companies of 50, 60, 70, 100 people in the $5 to $20 million range or higher. This is less of an issue. But in smaller companies, and I'm talking 3 and under, it's really important that the owner and shareholder or main shareholders do their personal planning about what they want for their lives before the annual planning for the business. And why I say that is this, because a lot of times in smaller businesses, the goal of the business is to serve an owner's life. And if you've built a business to be somewhat of a lifestyle business for you, and a lot of times smaller businesses who aren't planning big growth, who are planning to build enough of a revenue stream to support them, If you don't understand what you're trying to accomplish in the world and in your life before you do annual planning for your business, I think what happens is you kind of get the cart before the horse. And so it's really important that you understand you're the horse and the cart is the business, and the cart is job is to serve your life. And so as you're a smaller business, I think that's a really important distinction. It's a lesson I've learned over the years. Third one is that to do effective annual planning really demands that you have good financials, that you understand goal setting, that you understand objectives, you understand scorecards or key performance indicators. It based on what I've said today, it implies that you should really understand what your values are and a whole bunch of that stuff. But what I've learned over the years of doing this with people who are established at it and people who are new at it is it's really important to start where you are. Don't avoid not doing annual planning because you don't have all your chips, like you haven't got it all figured out. The process of doing this will improve your results over time. So start where you are. Do annual planning anyways, no matter where you are, no matter what you've brought to the table, do some annual planning. It will help. Next, your management team trust is critical to the outcome. And I can't say this enough. The trust of your management team together, the people who show up in this room to do annual planning, is critical to the success of the process. And so if you're a owner, an executive, a leader who rules with an iron fist and doesn't matter what other people say, this is not going to be helpful to you, especially if you bring your team together. It's really going to be important if your team's going to come to this that they have full permission to say anything that needs to be said. Elephants need to be on the table. You gotta allow everything to show up in these meetings in order to make them efficient and effective. Related and connected is this one. Elegant conflict and struggle in this meeting is an indicator of its effectiveness. And I have found over the years that if I work with a company and doing their annual planning and it's boring to me because it's just like everybody just agrees and it just processes forward, and at the end of the day you have your annual objectives and your financial plan and blah blah blah, it's just like nothing happens. A lot of times after the fact it's not as effective. But when there's an elegant conflict and there's struggle to define what are our key priorities, there's a wrestling to ensure that we have our priorities right, that we have our issues on the table, that we know what our most important things are, that we can agree to a financial objective for the year, all of that stuff together. If that's not in place and you can't wrestle your way through that, a lot of times it's like, ugh, we really didn't accomplish it. Doesn't mean you have to fight. It means that a lot of times there's a struggle. And I have found really effective meetings and everybody's whacked, like completely tired from the process. And so to me, 2-day annual planning is one that ends with everybody being wiped out, tired, because the process is full on intense. It's playing full out for the business and for the following year. And then finally, ultimately, facilitated is the best way for you to get the full benefit. And frankly, if you're trying to facilitate your annual planning and then think about your annual planning, you're kind of caught in a bind, because facilitation of annual planning is an art and practice to itself. And then on the other side, if you're trying to manage a meeting and manage your team and get the best out of them, you're thinking about that instead of thinking about what you want to contribute, what you want to say. And so it doesn't have to be me. I've done a lot of them, but you just need somebody to help facilitate, somebody who's skilled at the art of facilitation. And by doing so, by actually bringing someone in to help you, what it frees you up is allows them to write on the whiteboards and on the sticky notes and on the the 3M pieces of paper on the walls. It allows them to pull questions out of other people, to pull answers, to address people around the room, as opposed to you trying to do it. And so if I could give you one final lesson, it's that, like, make sure you get somebody to help you with this. Don't do this alone. It really is not nearly as effective. Can you? Yes, absolutely. You can do a lot of things on your own. But in annual planning, especially 2-day, if you're going to commit to this and you're going to go off-site and you're going to invest in this time, invest some more to make sure somebody helps you get the result you need. All right, coming back to this graphic, because I think it's such a good graphic, which is come together for an annual plan, work the plan, figure out your Q1s, figure out what your year looks like. And then, it doesn't matter how you do it, but eventually you're going to get close to this target. Reality changes. We never know where we're going. And, other than the next 3 months, it's all a crapshoot anyways. So do it, because ultimately it's going to help you in the process. I hope that helps. If you have any questions, please let me know. If you need help with this, please let me know. I'd love to help you process through your annual planning, and maybe as a result of that, your 2023, and I hope your 2023 and the years to come will be really effective for you. Thanks, and we'll talk soon.